What is up, everyone? Today I'm going to be showing you my workflow going from Revit into Unreal Engine. My workflow is a little bit different because I export my Revit model into Rhino first in order to clean up my UV meshes, in order to texture, and in order to clean up some of the geometry. I then export my Rhino model into 3ds Max, where I can double check my UVs and ultimately export the model as a Datasmith file, which is the file format supported by Unreal Engine, and ultimately getting my model into Unreal Engine where I can start creating a cinematic walkthrough of my ArcViz project. So let's get started. You're going to want to go to the Datasmith website and navigate to the Unreal Engine Datasmith Export Plugins webpage. I can post that in the link below. If you scroll down, you'll see a couple of options here. You'll notice that Revit does have the functionality to be able to export directly to Unreal Engine using the Datasmith plugin. However, I found that this is an issue because Revit cannot properly UV map all of your textures directly within Revit itself. And once you get your model into Unreal Engine, it's very hard to UV map and get the scale of all your textures right. So ultimately, I don't find the Revit exporter very useful in my case, since I'm going to export to Rhino and clean up and fix all my UV maps there. What we're really looking for here is the Autodesk 3ds Max Exporter Datasmith download. So we are going to choose whatever version of Unreal Engine we want to develop this project in. In my case, I was developing my project in version 4.24, so I'll select that and I'll just click on download to download the exporter. I'm not going to show you explicitly how to install the Datasmith plugin. It's just a matter of downloading it, opening it, installing it, and then the next time you open 3ds Max, it will automatically be loaded into the program itself. So the first thing I want to show you is how to export your Revit model into Rhino. Rhino uses a modeling system called NURBS, whereas Revit uses a combination of NURBS and polygons. So we don't want to just export this as, say, an FBX file type, because then you won't be able to modify your surfaces within Rhino. What we want to do is export this model as a NURBS model type. And in order to do that, you want to select your entire model with all of your elements and groups and classes selected. It might take a minute for that to load. Once everything is selected, we're going to want to click on File in the upper left-hand corner. We want to navigate to the Export option and hit the little arrow next to Export. You want to select CAD formats and then DWG format. This will open a dialog box where at the top of the dialog, you'll see this little box with the 3 little dots that says Modify Export Setup. Click on that. And we want to navigate over to Solids. Under Solids, you can see here, right now, if I were to export this model, it'd be exporting as a polygon, as a poly mesh, which we don't want. We want ACIS Solids, which is also referred to as NURBS modeling. So click on the ACIS Solids format. Make sure under units and coordinates, you have inches selected or feet or whatever other unit of measurement you prefer. This is going to be important to note because when we import it into Rhino, we want to maintain that same unit conversion. So right now I'm exporting in inches, and in Rhino I'll import in inches. Once you're done clicking on that, hit OK. Hit Next down at the bottom, and make sure you change the AutoCAD file type to AutoCAD 2007. I'm going to save this to my desktop and hit OK. Once we have that file exported, we will open up Rhino, and I'm going to type in units and change my units here to inches because that's what it was in Revit. Once I've done that, I'm going to click on File in the upper left. I'm going to click on Import, and I'm going to navigate to where I saved my Revit export files. Once I hit Open, I just want to make sure that my model units are in inches, and I'm just going to hit OK. Now this may take a few minutes again to import depending on how big the file is, so I'm just gonna let it do its thing and I'll be back when it's done. All right, so you can see it imported here. It looks a little bit crazy, but that's because it's in wireframe mode. So on the left-hand side here where we see perspective, let's click on the little arrow next to it, change that to shaded mode. And you can see here that it imported my model with its respective layers and classes. So on the right-hand side, if I click on layers over here, you can see everything is organized nicely by their layers. And I can turn, say, the walls off. It'll turn the walls off. I can turn the floor off. It'll turn the floor off, and so forth. So the next thing I want to show you is what I've done to clean up the model. So I'm going to open up the model once I've sort of relabeled my layers and added a bit more detail into the model. And you can see that here. So here I've started to relabel and nest specific objects and layers into different categories. So we have the facade, the floor, the wood. And the reason why I did this was because I needed a little bit more detail in the model. I needed to add wall bases. I needed to add a little bit of furniture, some custom casework that wasn't in the Revit model itself. So I just sort of reorganized everything. And you can see as I navigate into the model, there is a little bit more detail in here. The other thing I wanted to note is that right now, importing directly from Revit, you probably will not have any of your materials applied to the surfaces within Rhino. So I went through a process in this model in particular of importing or finding the textures that I wanted and then UV mapping directly within Rhino. I'm not going to go over how to UV map, but I can show you pretty quickly here what the final product looks like within Rhino itself. And again, UV mapping is super important when you want to get the scale of your textures right. You don't want to import your Rhino or Revit model into Unreal Engine with no UV mapping applied, because then what's going to happen is you're going to apply a texture in Unreal Engine and it's going to be, your floor texture is going to be gigantic and it's not going to be at the right scale and it's not going to be what you want. So I can go into my floor surface here and just show you quickly how I've UV mapped that or what I've done. So if I click on my floor surface and I click on texture mapping in the right hand corner, I've already unwrapped the surface and I've already applied a material to it. So if I do the UV editor, click on the UV editor box, it'll allow me to draw a separate box itself. And I'm going to do that in the top down view mode. And you can see here when I did that, it gave me a preview of what that floor surface looks like as it's properly UV mapped within the model. So basically I went into, in my case, V-Ray. If you don't have V-Ray, you can just go into the material editor here and add all of your custom materials in. I went into V-Ray and I added all of my materials into the model directly within V-Ray. And then I applied all of those materials directly to my surfaces within Rhino. It took a little bit of time, but it's definitely worth it to get the UV mapping right. Now, you can export directly from Rhino into Unreal Engine. You could select all of your objects, but since they're NURBs, they're not going to import into Unreal Engine with their UV maps. So all of this texturing that you would have just done would be erased. So instead of directly exporting from Rhino, we want to import this into 3D Studio Max, because in 3D Studio Max, we can preserve all of our UV maps and ultimately export the file as a Datasmith file format into Unreal Engine. I don't know why Unreal Engine hasn't worked directly with the Rhino to get the import process to work with UV maps, but hopefully that's something they'll fix in the future. So once you have all of your UV mapping done and all of your texturing done and all of your cleanup and 3D modeling done within Rhino, we want to export this as an FBX file format, which will turn it into a mesh. So what you're going to do is select your entire model with all of the layers turned on that you want and everything. You're going to go to File. you're going to click on Export Selected, and you're going to export this as an FBX file format. And I'm just going to save it to my desktop in its own separate folder for now, and I'll name it Example Building. And once I hit save, it's going to take a little bit for it to export, probably 10 or so minutes. But once it does, I'll be back to show you the next step. Okay, so now that that is finished exporting, I'm going to import it into 3D Studio Max. So in 3ds Max, go up to File, click on Import, navigate to where you exported that FBX file, and then just open it. Now you shouldn't have to change anything within here. The one thing you may want to check for under advanced options and units, you want it to scale automatically, and in this case it is detecting inches as the proper file format. So let's hit OK. Okay, and now you can see it imported, and you can see the materials applied directly to the surfaces within 3ds Max. That's a good indication that everything is imported properly. You could sort of pan around and go inside of the model just to make sure all of your geometry is there, or you could just start looking over on the left-hand corner at all of your different layers, turning things on and off to make sure things are still there. Once we have the file within 3ds Max, we can select everything again. We can go up to File, we can click Export, Export Selected, change your file format to Datasmith. This is the Datasmith plugin that you should have installed at the beginning of the tutorial. If you don't see this, you may want to try installing it again. So select that. I'm going to again save this. I'm going to name it Example Building. And this will create a Datasmith file once I hit save. And you shouldn't have to change any of these settings, just hit OK. Okay, so it finished exporting. I did get a lot of error messages here directly within 3ds Max. I haven't found that these have caused any significant issues within Unreal Engine itself, so I'm going to ignore those for now. And after you've exported the model, you can close or minimize 3ds Max and open up Unreal Engine. So I'm going to be working within version 4.24 because that's what I have been developing this model in. Once I import this sample model, I'll show you what the final product looks like at the end of the video. But basically, you're just going to choose whatever engine version you want to work in within Unreal Engine and click Launch. And now you can see here that you get a couple of options. You can either open up a template for gaming, film and TV, architecture, automotive. Obviously, we're going to select architecture. Hit Next. I always like to start with a blank canvas because I don't want any of the default settings or any of the added in starter content that Unreal puts into the projects. It just adds a little bit of bloat into the file size. So select blank and hit Next. I'm going to choose no starter content. We don't need it. If you have a ray tracing or an RTX card, you can enable ray tracing, but it is pretty taxing on your hardware. So this time I'm just going to keep it disabled, especially since this project is so big. And then I'm going to rename my project. In this case, this is fine for the sample. So I'll hit Create Project and it'll open Unreal Engine. Okay, now that Unreal Engine's open, we do have to change a couple of settings because you might not see this Datasmith plugin at the top of your screen. What you want to do is click on Settings, click on Plugins, type in Datasmith, and you want to make sure that your Datasmith CAD Importer plugin is enabled, the Content plugin is enabled, and the Datasmith GITF importer is enabled. The CAD importer is what's going to import your FBX model and your Rhino model into Unreal Engine. So once those have all been checked and you close this dialog screen, you might get a little message in the lower right saying that you need to restart Unreal Engine. Do that. And then once you restart, all of those plugins should be loaded and you should see the Datasmith option at the top. Now, before we import the model into Unreal Engine, we do want to change a couple of the other settings. I want to turn off the auto exposure. So under settings, if you go to project settings, just type in exposure. And you can see here auto exposure is enabled. I always disable this because if it's enabled, Unreal Engine will automatically control how bright or dark the scene is, depending on where you move. If you move inside of the building, it'll get lighter. If you're outside and the sun is really bright, it'll get darker. So I'm going to turn that off. So you'll notice here everything looks very washed out after we disable auto exposure. What we want to do is click on the sun sky on the right hand side, and you want to navigate to directional light, and you can see here that your sun is extremely bright. If we lower this, and I'm going to be dramatic here, I'll lower it to like 10. You can see here, actually it wasn't that dramatic. So you can see here I lowered it to 10 and everything sort of comes into focus, I guess. It's not as overly exposed or blasted out. So I would definitely play with the intensity before you start importing your model within Unreal Engine. After you get your lighting a little bit better in terms of how you want it to look, we are finally ready to import the Datasmith file. So let's click on Datasmith at the top and navigate to your Datasmith file. So I'll do that, and you'll see here my uDatasmith file. Hit open, and then I typically right click on content, create a new folder, and just name it Datasmith. Hit OK. So this dialog box is super important, and here you can choose what you want to pull from the Datasmith file into Unreal Engine. You can add lights into your Datasmith project. So if you are developing this in Rhino or in 3ds Max, you can put in your lights directly within those programs, and it should import them in their exact spots within Unreal Engine. In this case, I didn't choose to have any of my lights imported, and I didn't place any. So I'm just going to uncheck that. You can also save camera perspectives too, which is really cool. In my case, I also don't have those, so I'm just going to uncheck those and animations. So you'll notice here there's a static mesh options, and this is your Lightmap resolution. This is basically how detailed your shadows will be casting off of all of your geometry within the scene. Right now, when you import, it's automatically going to generate those Lightmap UVs at a certain Lightmap resolution. So you can see here it's between 64 and 512. If these values start getting extremely high, and I'll show you what I mean in a few minutes, it's going to take forever to calculate your lighting within Unreal. So right now this is fine. These are manageable numbers. Let's just hit import. Okay, so you can see it imported. It's extremely dark because the Datasmith plugin brings in your lighting values within 3ds Max. So in order to get it to not be that dark, up in the upper right hand corner here in the search bar, let's type in exposure. And you can see here there's a global exposure post-process volume. We just want to delete that. So hit delete on the keyboard. Hit yes. And bam, looks nice. So now we can navigate around just to see what the model looks like when it imported. You can see here all of my surfaces that had glass on them did not import properly. They don't ever import as transparent, so you'll have to create a glass material within Unreal Engine and import that. And you might also notice that some of my materials are not exactly how I want them. So in this instance, my materials came in a little bit darker. The good thing is all of your UV maps are now applied to all of the geometry in your scene. So now if you want to re-import some of those materials to make them look more realistic and look nicer, you can. And that's just a matter of selecting all the JPEGs or PNGs of your specific materials and dragging them into Unreal Engine, which then creates a material for you that you can apply to the surfaces. So that's pretty much it. That's how you get your model from Revit into Unreal Engine with all the UV mapping applied properly to it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you my finished project and show you some of the tricks that I learned when working through this project in particular. All right, so I have my final project in here, and there are a couple of things I wanted to show you in terms of sort of optimizing your scene and also getting the most out of the reflections in your scene. So one of the big things that you want to start adding into your Unreal Engine scene are these reflection sphere captures. These things basically take all of the lighting information being cast in your model and gather that information in conjunction with the geometry itself to create accurate reflections within your model. I've taken these and placed a couple of them around the scene on every story of my building so that all of my reflections are accurately represented. The other thing that I did is I went through, and you can see here I added all of my lights into the file. So most of them ended up being point lights. Some of them ended up being custom lights. But I think it's super important to model your lighting accurately within your scene, because then you sort of get your real world conditions within it, and you can sort of start to understand where you might need to start adding more lighting and that sort of stuff. So after I imported or placed all of my lighting, I then started to look around the scene and look in areas where I started to get those shadows and where I could start to boost up the lighting within those areas. So I mentioned before the Lightmap resolution and how that could potentially impact the performance of your scene when you're rendering your lighting out. I want to show you what I was talking about there. So if you left click on your lit little box right here on the left hand side, and you go down to optimization view modes, you want to click on Lightmap density. And that's going to open up this view mode where you can sort of see the UV mapping of the lighting on every single surface. Green means that the UV mapping is very low, which means your shadows will be more blurry and low resolution. Yellow, it means you're getting higher in resolution, and then red means you're very high in resolution, which will ultimately impact the performance of your lighting export. But in ArcViz, typically we want to boost our Lightmap resolution up because we want that fidelity and that, I guess, graphical look and quality to the rendering to make it look as realistic as possible. So in order to change some of these Lightmap resolutions, I'll just give you an example here. So this model of this woman in here is very, very low resolution, hence why it's green. So if we click on her, and on the right hand side over here, we type in Lightmap, we can override the default Lightmap resolution that Unreal Engine brought this model in as. So right now, you remember before the range was between 64 and I think 215 or 512. We're gonna override that default of 64 and we're gonna boost it up to something like 500. And you can see here the little squares changed on the woman, and now she's red, which means she's the UV light maps on her are mapped at a very high resolution, so the shadows will be nice. I'm going to zoom out a little bit just so you can get an overall feel of how I've mapped this. Some things require a high light map resolution, other things may not, depending on what kind of surface they have. So if it's a metallic surface and it's reflecting things, you might not need to have as high of a light map resolution on it because things are sort of blurry anyway when they're reflecting off of it. Another thing I wanted to show you was the cinematic viewport. So right now you can see my scene may look a little dark or maybe not as high fidelity as I want it to look. So one way to start to see what it will actually look like is to open up the cinematic viewport. Now, in order to open that, you will have to put in cinematic cameras into your scene, and you can see here I do have a bunch of cameras and cameras on rails in order to create my cinematic walkthrough of the space. So if I want to see, or if I want to sort of snap into one of those cameras to see what it's specifically looking at, what I want to do is navigate to this little left-hand down arrow. You're going to go down and click on layouts and click on two panes. So now you'll see I have two split views. I have on my left my game mode, where I can sort of navigate freely throughout the model. And then on the right, I have a static viewed mode, which I am ultimately going to open my camera within. So if I navigate to where my camera is located within the scene, I can open up my master camera file where I have all of my camera shots already lined up within the scene. And then all I have to do is click on this little camera icon, and bam, it opened up the camera of that exact view at that exact time. Now I want to turn on game mode so I don't see any of the sort of excess details like where the lights are placed and all of that. And you can see here when I start to fast forward through my scene, it follows my camera cuts, and it isn't an accurate representation of what it's going to export as, because Unreal Engine is trying to render the scene as best as it can in real time right now, but because things are so highly detailed, when it exports as a PNG image sequence, it will export them at a higher resolution because the program has more time to be able to sort of generate the lighting conditions and the reflections within the scene. So once you export this, it will look a little bit better than what you're seeing on the screen. Now, I keep talking about generating your lighting. One thing you'll notice is in the upper left-hand corner of my viewport, it says that lighting needs to be rebuilt. Every single time I add something into the scene, that lighting needs to be rebuilt is going to come back and show itself. So you can see here, if I were to move this column or move anything within the scene, so say this table, then if I go to show stats and click that, you can see here lighting needs to rebuild. In order to rebuild your lighting, click the little down arrow next to build. Make sure your lighting quality, if you're working iteratively through this, is set to preview or medium, and then hit build lighting, and it will rebuild the lighting with the geometry in its proper location. So I think that's all I'm going to show for now. It's sort of the overall basic primer of the method in which I export from Revit into Rhino, into 3ds Max, and then ultimately into Unreal Engine, and how to get my UV mapping and materials to sort of be properly mapped on my surfaces. I'm going to lead you out here with the finished project just so you can see what it ended up looking like. Thanks for watching and have a good one.